Today's webinar is about changes and developments in the Sedex risk assessment tool. And we have two people presenting today. That's me, I'm Rebecca White, I'm the training manager here at Sedex. And along with me is Tom Sewell, who is product manager at Sedex. And he has really been the driving force behind building and creating the new risk assessment tool. So it's brilliant. We've got him here, although I say here, we're in different places, so we'll be swapping between us sort of virtually. So it's great that we've got Tom with us, and he is both going to present half the presentation, but then also is there to help us answer some questions as well. So the agenda today is quite packed. We're going to get through a lot. We're going to start by looking at the risk assessment tool's aims and the audiences that we see using this tool. We're then going to look at how the tool captures risk broadly. So what's new about our new tool and what stays the same in comparison to the old tool, or should I say the existing tool. We're then going to unpack a few of those key differences. So that includes the fact that the new tool will be giving a lot more visualization and information about vulnerable populations in supply chains. We'll talk through how audit data is used in the tool. And then we'll also give some background to the data that we use to create the scores, how we put those together, and the weightings that are given to various sources of information. And then we're going to stop for a Q&A. That first half of the presentation will be quite information heavy, and it'll be a chance to stop and answer some of your questions. Do send those questions in as they come to you. If anything needs clarifying, I'll talk just now about how you do that, and so we can answer them there, and then we'll go into the second half of the presentation where Tom will be taking us through some of the risk assessment reports in the risk tool and hopefully hopping onto the tool itself to show you around. And then we'll finish with a transition timeline just to talk through again how we're moving from the old versions of the tool into the new. And then we'll have another Q&A. So we'll take questions again at the end. In terms of how you ask questions, hopefully many of you have been on some of the webinars in this series already. It's the same. We will use the question box, which some of you have already used. Thank you to tell me that you can see and hear me. If you write questions into that question box, and then during the Q&A breaks, Tom and I will work through those and try and answer everything. If we don't answer a question because we run out of time or we think it needs a written response, we will definitely be getting back to anything that isn't answered in the session with a follow-up email. And we will also be sending you a recorded recording of this webinar and frequently asked questions document about the new risk assessment tool, and that will go out within the week. So we have been asking our audiences in these webinars at this time, just so that Tom and I get a sense of how familiar you are with the existing tool. We've been doing a poll, and we've been asking, does your company currently use the Sedex risk assessment tool? So I'm just going to launch that onto the screen. And hopefully you will be seeing that now. Fantastic. Thank you. So the answers are coming in. So the question, does your company currently use the Sedex risk assessment tool? You can answer yes, as it is, yes, along with other sources of information, or no. Brilliant. Thank you very much for voting. I think we've got about 2/3 of people voting. So any more votes to come in, please send those in, and then I will seek to share the results with you. Okay, so I think you can now see the poll results. It shows that about, as you see, 56% use it as it is, 16% use it along with other sources of information, and about a third, just under a third of people currently are not using it. So I hope, that what we're saying is interesting and a really useful introduction to our new risk tool. Thank you for participating in that. Okay, moving on. So to just give you a quick recap of what we have been doing, or I should say what Tom has been doing in collaboration with others for the last year and a bit, is that we have been building a completely new risk assessment tool. And why have we done this? Well, it was really driven by the refresh of the self-assessment questionnaire that we have also been doing, which involved a lot of member consultation and expert consultation. And we realized in the process of doing that this was a great opportunity to really build something that was very integrated with our new SAQ and that built on the advice that we got from experts around good practice in risk assessment, as well as something that sought to meet the evolving needs of our members. And so we have built this tool in collaboration with Anthesis. You can see their logo in the bottom left of the screen. And they are a specialist global sustainability service and solutions provider. And what they really brought to the table were risk specialists, technological know-how in terms of developing the interface of the risk tool, and also statisticians helping to figure out how to create effective risk indicators. So the purpose of the tool is really to support members to identify labour, human rights, governance and environmental risks across their businesses and supply chains. And if you joined our webinar last week, where we talked about risk assessment in supply chains, and a key point of which was that risk assessment is not an end into and of itself, it's really a step in a process, with the aim of that process really being to highlight opportunities for mitigating those risks. So as you see just at the point underneath, this really highlights opportunities for due diligence activities, development programs and capability building initiatives according to relative risk. So this tool has been designed with that aim in mind, and it seeks to help do that more effectively. So we have built the tool to be relevant to a range of users. That includes large multinational enterprises or those with advanced responsible sourcing programs. And it's also something that can be used by smaller businesses seeking to meet legislative or customer requirements. And a new element to the tool is that we plan to make a few of the reports within the tool accessible to audit companies who might want to use that information for audit preparation, for background research, etc. But really it's a tool that we hope can be used at many different levels and that meets different needs. So how do we capture risk, and what's staying the same and what is changing? This is an overview really of that. So on the left hand side you can see a box, and that really describes the overall format that we are using to capture or characterize really risk, and that is the same as how we do it in the existing tool. So what we do is that we take country and sector risk, and we call that inherent risk. We take indicators on that, and then we add that together with outputs from the self-assessment questionnaire in the form of risk assessed questions. And we then can bundle that together to provide an overall risk score for a site or a business. And that risk score is partitioned into risk scores by pillar. And when I say by pillar, I mean by the SMETA pillars that Sedex use. And they are labour, environment, business ethics, and health and safety. So that overall format is the same in the new tool, but there are also some very key differences and changes. And so that's on the right. Firstly, to go through those, the risk scored self-assessment questionnaire questions that we focus on will be different to what we currently do, and we will be focusing much more on capturing site characteristics, and we won't be including in that the kind of management systems questions that we currently do, and I will talk a bit about that in a second. Secondly, there will be greater visibility of vulnerable populations in the new tool, in line with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Then thirdly, we will be not using Verisk Maplecroft data in our new tool, and instead we are going to be using publicly available and a licensed risk indicator, and we are developing our own risk indicator indices from those publicly available sources, and that will form the basis of risk indicators in the tool. And what that really allows us to do is to be transparent in terms of what kind of information we're using and where it comes from. And secondly, it allows us to go further into the nature of risk and give more granularity and understanding behind those risk scores that you're getting. And as I said, I will go into that in more detail. Okay, so to go back to that first point in terms of the information we're taking from the SAQ that goes into creating risk scores. So what we're looking to do is reduce reliance on self-assessed information on management processes and policies. Currently, we do take information from the SAQ on that and put it into our risk score, but on reflection, we do consider that there is real scope for inaccuracy in that. We think that comes from the fact that there is the potential for incentivizing some suppliers to provide a positive answer around management systems or monitoring and evaluation, and particularly if this is closely linked to things like audit frequency, or they consider that there might be pushback or consequences from a buying organization if they don't answer positively in those situations. So this does bring in the potential for inaccuracy. And in general, having engaged risk specialists in the development of this tool is also understood that self-reported information on management processes is generally considered a weak indicator of actual practice. The chart on the right really links to this thinking in that it shows risk scores from 6,000 sites on the Sedex system. It's just a sample. But what it shows is that the risk scores from filling out the SAQ show that almost all those sites are at a low risk, with a few medium risk sites and virtually no high risk sites. And then if you look at the inherent risk scores relating to those sites, you see a sort of almost mirror image with very few low risk sites and then quite high numbers of medium and high risk sites. And then if you bring that together into an overall score, there is the potential to sort of artificially reduce or dampen the risk, the overall risk score. So what we're doing actually then is separating out those two sources of information. So in the first, we will develop a site characteristics score, and that really takes information from hard data on characteristics of the site. That might be the type of workers present, how they're hired and employed, whether there are hazardous materials on the site, environmental practices undertaken, and those will be captured and put into a risk-scored site characteristics score. But importantly, we absolutely don't want to lose sight of the management systems that are in place. And so we will be taking information from those questions about management systems, policies, processes, monitoring and feedback, etc. And we will be then creating a management controls score out of that. But that is not a risk assessed score. It will sit within the risk tool as part of a report and can be looked at alongside the risk information. And that also is the management control score is also what then gets put into the supplier facing report that comes out of the self-assessment questionnaire. Okay, moving on to another key change in our new tool, and that is the visibility of vulnerable groups. And that's really in line with an approach recommended by the UN Guiding Principles, which asks businesses to pay particular attention to those that may be at heightened risk of becoming vulnerable or marginalised, and with due regard to the different risks that may be faced by women and men. Why is this important? Well, we find that these groups are disproportionately exposed to workplace-based risks, and it's therefore really useful to know where those vulnerable groups are in your supply chain, so that when you understand also the nature of, say, inherent risk at that site, you can then think about what next steps you are taking with a full understanding of both the nature of risk and the nature of the vulnerable groups at that site. So just to go through a little bit about who we will be providing information about, and there will be in what we're calling vulnerable populations, and that will focus really on women and migrants. Women, because they tend to be trapped in low-skilled work in many parts of the world, and they are disproportionately exposed to the most vulnerable situations in a workforce. And then migrants, because they are vulnerable to labour exploitation, discrimination and trafficking. They tend to there are more language barriers present, fewer local support networks, perhaps less understanding of local laws and their own rights. And then secondly, what we're calling the group under vulnerable employment terms, non-permanent employees who often do not receive the wages and benefits given to their permanent colleagues. And they often have vulnerable workers in those non-permanent employment contracts. So a higher proportion of migrants, young women, elderly in those kinds of jobs. And then off-site workers also in that vulnerable employment group, because they are more difficult to see due to their work, as say they might be mobile, they might be remote workers or home workers. They're just more difficult to understand and access, and therefore are more exposed to risks. Okay, and you will see how this is all visualized and shown, and how you really access this information in the second half of the talk, when Tom will be showing you around some of the risk reports in the tool. Okay, how will audit data be used in the new risk assessment tool? Well, when we were consulting about how to make this tool, one of the big parts of feedback we got really from members was that we don't make good use of audit information for a site or business at the moment. And there was some people asking whether we could put audit results into the overall risk rating. But on consideration, we concluded that audits and the risk scores or report are trying to do two different things. A risk tool and risk scores look to capture the likelihood of potential poor outcomes that may happen in the future. So as we talked about risk last week and defined it, it's a theoretical concept that looks at things that may, poor outcomes that may happen. While an audit does something quite different, it's a way of capturing actual poor practice in the present. And if you were to bundle those two things together into a score, you're really putting together kind of two different things, and you move away from a risk score into something a bit different and potentially quite unclear or confusing. So what we've done is we've kept those two elements separate, and instead what we'll be doing is making the outputs of audits available through the tool so that you can then look at that alongside your risk data. Okay, so now I'm going to spend just a few slides going through some background about how we will use risk indicators in the tool and to make scores and how those indicators were chosen and built. So starting with inherent risk. So this really is information about risks at the level of country and sector. And what we are doing in this tool is that we are bringing those country and sector scores together, but we're then delineating the country score also by topic. And you can see what those topic categories are in the table in the right. And as you can see, they kind of link across to or corresponded to different parts of or different pillars, SMETA pillars. So what this does is that it just gives a lot more granularity to the nature of inherent risk scoring beyond the four pillars. So rather than bundling together a lot of different drivers for risk, say around labour standards, you can then unpack that risk score and see what underlies it. And so in turn, that means that it becomes much more actionable. So you would then understand if you had a high, say a high labour risk score, you can then say, is this a wage issue or is this a discrimination issue? And depending on what it is, you are then much better placed to take next steps and think about appropriate action. And really this is, as I explained earlier, one of the advantages and of moving away from the Verisk Maplecroft data, which did just score at those four pillar levels. So moving back to the inherent risk scores, the country score is added to the sector score, and you can see the relative weights of that. The country risk will be scored from 0 to 6, and the sector risk will be scored from 0 to 4. And this is a change from the previous version where the inherent risk was split 50-50 between country and sector. But again, on reflection and having talked with experts, this is what we consider is a better decision. You'll note that I've said additional points are given for high risk goods. There are particular goods produced in particular countries that we know are associated, have a high risk of being associated with certain poor outcomes. And we are in those circumstances where those goods are being produced in that country, we're giving a little boost to that sector score. It's just a small one, but that just adds to the risk scores, and I will talk about that now. So the sector, where you have a combination of a certain high-level ISIC section and a certain country, and that kind of flags in the databases that we have the production of a particular high risk product, we're then adding a little booster score, as I said, to the sector scores. So you can see some examples of that at the bottom of the screen. Raising cattle in Bolivia, or indeed growing soy in quite a few countries in South America, is flagged up on the Global Canopy Program's Forest 500 database as being of a particular risk of deforestation. So that will add a little booster score. Similarly, garment manufacture in Bangladesh is through the US Department of Labor's child labour databases also flagged as having a high risk of child labour. So that's just a little additional element. Right. Finally, just to go into a bit more information about where, or a bit more detail about where the information comes from that goes into these country and sector scores. So as I said, we are not using Verisk Maplecroft data for scoring, and instead we have compiled risk indicators from well-respected, publicly available international databases. You can see some of the sources that we're using on the right-hand side of the screen. And some examples at the bottom. For example, on discrimination, we're using Freedom House information around freedom to practice belief. Practice beliefs is one example of one of the indicators that's going in there. For child labour, we're using information from UNICEF and the Global Child Forum's database on children's rights in the workplace. And so we've taken lots of indicators from different places to compile our risk indices. And how have we chosen where to go and what to take? So that links to these bullet points at the top left. We have looked at how relevant are they to what the risk we are trying to capture. We then ask also, what is the coverage of countries and regions? Is it sufficiently wide, as in, is it global really? Are the indicators we are choosing comparable? So in other words, are the numbers created for each country in a comparable way? That they come from reliable and good quality sources of information, and that they need to be updated frequently. Okay, I've gone through quite a lot there in terms of sort of the background really to the changes in the tool and how risk scores are built and where that information comes from. Please do send in your questions if you have any. We're going to break now for a question and then or questions and then we can go on with the second half of the presentation. So I'm going to hand over to Tom. If you
Thanks, Bex. I am here.
Great.
Yeah, great. We've only got one question at the moment, so yeah, if you do have any questions from what Bex has covered, do ask them now. Jean-Pascal, you asked, I think when Bex was showing the slide about how audit information will be used, you asked, what about if no audit is available for that supplier? Well, I guess the answer to that is because the audit results are not affecting the site's risk score, and rather the audit information is simply being presented as an additional layer of information to kind of help paint that overall picture of a particular supplier, then that wouldn't affect the site's risk score, but simply you wouldn't be able to see whether the audit has verified any of those risks or not. So it's simply just kind of not be able to display any information in the audit section of the view. I hope that answers your question. I'll just give another 30 seconds. It seems that we don't have a lot of questions. So Bex, I think you've covered everything really well.
Yeah.
And if we don't hear anything else, I will move on. I need to take control of the presentation, don't I? So give me a moment and I'll do that.
So Jean-Pascal, just while Tom's getting his screen up, you ask, what is the impact of this new SAQ on the rate versus the previous one? I just to clarify that question, does that mean what is the impact of the new SAQ on the risk score compared to the previous one? Aha, yes, great. Okay. At the old SAQ and the new SAQ are quite different in terms of what kind of information they collect, and then we are also changing what information we take from the SAQ. So there will be differences in terms of the impact on the score, but at the moment, until sites start filling out that information, I think it's very difficult to say how that score will be impacted. Tom, did you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I guess just to clarify that, I suppose for a period of time we'll essentially have two sets of products in play. So you've got the SAQ that's currently in use, feeds into the current risk assessment tool, and when we launch the new SAQ, the new SAQ will feed into the new risk assessment tool. So it won't be the case that the current SAQ feeds into the new risk assessment tool. It will simply be that all kind of previous or currently completed SAQs continue to be scored in the current risk assessment tool for a period of 12 months. And then as people transition across to the new SAQ, that new SAQ will receive a score within the new tool. So you wouldn't have a situation where you've got two different scores for the same SAQ, because the current one, as I say, will be scored in the current tool, and the new SAQ will be scored in the new tool. So there's a kind of distinction between the two sets. If that makes sense, hopefully it will, at least when the products are launched.
And Jean-Pascal, just to add, you say the suppliers will have to fulfill the new SAQ and timing ? Really good questions. Right at the end of this presentation, I will go through a timeline that talks about how we're transitioning between them. Yes, suppliers will have to fill out the new SAQ, but there will be a year over which that can be done. But let's pick that back up if you still have questions at the end of the presentation, if we haven't answered them. Okay, over to you, Tom.
Great. Well, hopefully everyone can see my screen now.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is, talk through the different reports that will be available within this new tool. So essentially, the risk assessment tool is a suite of 7 different reports, which you can see there on the screen, and they'll all be hosted within our Sedex Analytics platform, which some of you might be familiar with already. And the thinking really behind the development of the reports was threefold. So firstly, to really make sure that all of the features that are available in the current tool were reinstated within this new tool. Secondly, to try to really make better use of the data that's available to you from your supply chain, to try and provide additional insight into risk, particularly around those vulnerable populations that Bex talked about. And thirdly, of course, to really try and make sure that the user experience and the user interface, they're an enjoyable experience, and certainly kind of improved and more user-friendly in relation to the current tool, which is probably starting to feel a little bit dated for those of you that use it will be aware of. So really, when we think about the different reports that are available, you can probably break them down into 2 different types of report. One which really provides a risk score based on the country and sector information only, so what we call the inherent risk information, or they highlight where particular products or commodities have key risks associated with them. And those reports are disconnected from any actual site data that you might have collected through the Sedex platform. And then the second set of reports will be those that connect that inherent risk information with the site-specific information as collected from your supply chain via the Sedex platform. And again, those types of reports can probably be broken down further into 2 different types of reports. So either those that display the information at an aggregated level, so looking at a kind of entire supply chain and understanding, what are the risks within that supply chain, which are the suppliers that have potentially the highest risks, and provide a greater analysis of the information available to you. And then those that focus on a single specific site to enable you to understand better about the risks associated with that particular site. So what we'll do now is look at each of the reports in slightly more detail. They're not the finished versions, I have to say, but hopefully they'll help to give you a better sense of at least the look and feel that you can expect from the reports when we do launch the tool next year. So what you can see here is what we refer to as the pre-screening report. A similar version exists within the current tool. And really, there'll be two different versions of this report. So what this does is allows you to look at a specific country and try to understand what the inherent risks are within that country. And as you can see, it'll be broken down by the individual topics, as we referred to earlier in the presentation. The second version of this report will enable you to actually download a template which you could populate with information about your supply chain. If those suppliers are not already on Sedex and you want to understand from a broad base of suppliers which sites might have greater risk, you'll be able to input the country and the sector and the product information, upload that template back into the platform and receive the risk scores for all of those sites that you've entered information for. So that would be particularly useful if you're, say, someone who's new to Sedex and hasn't yet onboarded your suppliers to the platform to collect additional information about them, and you want to know where to start. You could use that. And within the version that you can see on the screen here, there'll also be the ability to compare one country with another country to see whether the risks might be different. And what we'll also be doing with this report and with a few other of the reports as well is overlaying the the numerical risk information with more qualitative risk information. So we'll be collecting and keeping regularly updated a database of what we call reported evidence. So articles, research from NGOs or media that highlight risks in particular countries or to particular types of people within countries. And when you're viewing that particular country, you'll be able to see links to the different articles related to it to help you further contextualize the risk information or understand a bit better if it might be a specific region within a country that is that the risks are more prevalent, for example. So the next set of reports that are not specifically necessarily looking at a supply chain or a particular site will use the information available about particular key risks. So these will be related to child labour, forced labour, deforestation or conflict minerals. And they will draw on particular sources that have highlighted where there might be risks associated with these areas in particular countries and related to particular commodities. So one source that some of you might be familiar with is the US Department of Labor's list of goods produced by forced and child labor, which is a relatively comprehensive list that shows where particular commodities in particular countries are known via their research to sometimes be produced with either forced or child labor. And the tool will help to highlight whether that might be the case with a particular supplier that's connected to you on the Sedex platform. But what this will also enable you to do, in this view, you can see that you're looking at a supplier who is a garment manufacturer in Bangladesh and has certain risks associated with them, but it will also pull in information from UN trade data to highlight I guess, display the other countries that are key export markets for that particular good or commodity and indicate whether those risks have been are known within the other export markets as well. So obviously it's not a exhaustive list of sources, but we're really trying to just draw on the information that is known and reliable and available to present where key risks are known to highlight those to you. And there'll be another version of this report, in fact, that not only looks at the particular site that you're reviewing, but also uses the information taken from the self-assessment questionnaire to understand, which countries that supplier might be sourcing from and what products they're sourcing from those countries that might also have any of these key risks associated with them to help you understand a bit better whether there might be risks further in the supply chain beyond the specific supplier that you're looking at. And again, this information will be overlaid with the articles and evidence that we have about particular issues to help you to kind of understand perhaps some more context for the risks. There will also be the final version of this report is one where you would be able to select a particular commodity and understand, in which countries across the world any of these risks are associated with that commodity. This next report then brings us into the world of kind of connecting the inherent risk information with the information about your suppliers on the Sedex platform. So this probably is the core report that most people will use and be familiar with in the current tool, which essentially helps you to understand and prioritize which suppliers in your supply chain might have a greater or lesser risk. And the way that we have reinterpreted that report within the new tool is to display it within this matrix, where on one axis you have the inherent risk score, so looking at the country and the sector in which the site is located, and then looking at the on the other axis the characteristics of that site. So do they employ workers that might be more vulnerable to the risks within that country? And that enables you to understand whether any sites in your supply chain might be both located in an area of greater risk, and also their workforce composition perhaps lends greater exposure to those risks, and you might want to understand a bit better what they're doing to mitigate those risks. And on the right-hand side, you can see how the audit information collected for the suppliers in that view will also be kind of drawn into the report to help you to understand whether the audits that you've conducted or that have been conducted for those suppliers have also picked up any issues and what they are, and they'll be broken down by the different levels. So you've got the category, which might be broadly kind of health and safety or working hours or regular employment. But then they'll be broken down further into the subcategories and the individual issue titles, so that you can see if certain non-compliances or issues being found that are repeating themselves and might warrant further attention. And that note at the bottom of the page there shows that all of these reports will also be able to switch into a table view. So if you want to further understand what scores are driving the risk scores that you can see in this visual view, or take the information and merge it with information that you hold within your own internal systems, and also to see what the kind of overall score for the supply chain and the individual suppliers might be, you'll be able to do that in the table view as well. And that's the same for all of the reports, that the data driving the visual views will be available in an exportable table format. So if I were to click on a specific site that had appeared within my risk assessment matrix, I would be able to then drill down further and view that site in more detail. So as we said, these are not the finished views of the reports, but essentially the site view will enable you to, first of all, see where that site is located in the particular country, understand a bit more about the composition of its workforce and whether it might have workers that are more vulnerable to the risks within that country. And you'll also be able to see the various risk scores associated with that site in terms of the inherent risk, whether the characteristics of the site lend greater exposure to those risks. And you'll be able to, from here, also see the management controls score for that site. So whether the site is putting in place the systems to manage their risks and how they're progressing over time. And you'll also be able to, as we said, view the most recent audit for that site. And there'll be a couple of different areas that you can drill down even further and see, for example, how the site's risk score compares to other sites within the same country or sector. And we have some data sets that are available at a subnational level, which might be able to highlight risk more localized. For example, if a site is located in an area of water scarcity, for example. The next report that will be made available in the tool is not specifically a new report, but it will be an updated version of the existing indicators of forced labour reports that we have available. For those of you not familiar with these reports, they really build on the guidance that we have available on operational practice and indicators of forced labour, which are really trying to highlight whether during an audit there might be certain issues found that, whilst on their own, would not necessarily indicate that forced labour is occurring at a site, but if combined with other factors, might suggest that there's a heightened risk of forced labour occurring. So we have been through a process of review with the Mekong Club, who are experts in modern slavery and supply chains, to really understand whether the indicators that we're suggesting and are fitting into the correct categories and have the appropriate strengths allocated to them. And we'll also be making use of some of the developments that we've completed for this risk assessment tool, including the creation of a forced labour index that we've had specially commissioned as part of this project. So really overlaying the information collected at audit with also known risks about forced labour within a particular country, and again using some of that external data around products and commodities that might be produced with forced labour to highlight whether there might be a greater risk. And of course then using the features available within Sedex Analytics to better visualize those risks and present them back in a way that provides more insights and analysis. And then the final report that will be available as well is the report that's called the Risk Analysis Report, which will in fact be a set of 4 different reports, which is really trying to use the data that's available to you in the platform to highlight where there might be risks within your supply chain. So what I'll try to do now, in fact, is switch this to our test environment to show you, rather than through a screenshot, how some of the reports will actually work. So bear with me while I just switch screens. Okay. I hope now that people are beginning to see we're now not in a presentation mode, but we're in the test environment of our risk assessment tool. So again, we're looking at the risk analysis report, and each of these reports will, of course, have the title and explanation of what the reports are doing, as well as different tooltips to explain to you what the different sections within that report are showing. But I think it's actually logged me out. Let's just give that a second to refresh. There we go. So if I click on the tooltip, it will tell me what's happening in that particular section of the report. If I hover over some text, it will explain to me why we're highlighting risks to these categories of workers, what the scores mean and how they're composed. And you'll be able to, I guess, navigate the report with helpful hover text boxes and tooltips. So this report really is doing 2 things. It's trying to highlight where in my supply chain I might have risks. So with any countries in my supply chain that have a high risk of something, will highlight as red. And if I wanted to actually focus on a particular issue like child labour or any of the other issues, that report would update and then display in a kind of visual way where the risks might be for that particular topic. So from this view, I can see that in Ethiopia, I have one site and that has a high risk of child labour within Ethiopia. If I wanted to understand a bit better about which sites do I have in that particular country, I could click on that country, and the map is interactive, and it will drill down to show me exactly in Egypt where are those sites located. And you may have noticed as well that the small dashboard view here updated with that information, as did the worker numbers as well. So whatever's in the view on your screen, the information will be updated, so you can again see the composition of the workforce in that particular country, and maybe see within different regions, do you have a kind of different composition of a workforce. And as we said, whilst we're trying to make the reports very visual and intuitive, you'll also be able to access the underlying data by clicking on the data sheet for all of the reports, which will show you, the data that's driving that report. And you can move back to the dashboard there. Similarly, we're aware that many of our members don't necessarily keep completely up to date the suppliers connected to them in the platform in terms of those suppliers that are actively supplying them at any one time. So we have a series of advanced filters available for those of you who use different reference numbers to identify particular suppliers or sites, whether they be active or seasonal, for example. You'll be able to filter the reports to show only information that's relevant to you as well. And as I mentioned, a lot of these reports have kind of not just one view, but several different views where you can drill down further and see more detailed information. So in this report, I've clearly got a score related to women in my supply chain. If I were to click on this icon, it would then take me to the report that provides more analysis about women in my supply chain. And so we won't really go into the detail of exactly what these reports are showing, but hopefully it gives you more of a sense for how the reports look and feel. And within this view, as we mentioned, several of the reports will overlay this with information related to the issues on display. So when I click something like this will then take me to reported evidence about the issues on display. So this is kind of using dummy data that's not necessarily related to women in supply chains, but you've got an article here, for example, that you might want to click on to find out further information. So that will take you to the source of that information, and you can explore the context of the issues that are being reported in a bit more detail. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the reports that are coming. This one, I guess, probably to state, this is one of the more advanced and analytical reports, and hopefully what we showed you previously were the more standard reports where if you just want to understand, key risks within a particular country or the risk scores of a particular supplier, you'll be able to do that in the other reports. But hopefully this gives you a sense for some of the reports that are coming. So at that, I think I will hand back over to Bex to talk to you about the timeline for this product.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Just briefly to go through how we are moving from the existing versions of the self-assessment questionnaire and risk assessment tool into the new versions. If you joined us for the SAQ webinars previously, you will have seen this, but it's useful to go through again. What we will be doing is using our existing SAQ up until February of 2020. At that point, we will then be swapping over into using the new SAQ, at which point the old SAQ will enter read-only mode. So it will not be editable beyond that point. And from mid-February 2020, we will be asking new sites on the system or existing sites who wish to start or do a new SAQ to start doing, they would have to then fill out the new SAQ. Once we have the SAQ launched, embedded in, and we have done some training, started to do training around that, a month later we will be launching the new risk assessment tool in March 2020. And again, the old risk assessment tool will enter read-only mode. And from March 2020, you will be able to begin using some of the reports that Tom showed you around, particularly the ones that don't rely on SAQ information. Obviously they will be ready to go from the beginning. However, as we also mentioned, once the new risk assessment tool and SAQs are launched, the old versions of the tools will still be available. We will have Verisk Maplecroft data available for 12 months after the launch of the new risk assessment tool. So you will still be able to use that information, you just won't be able to edit it and it won't be updated. So we then have a year during which we will be encouraging strongly all sites on the system to be filling out a new SAQ. And as that SAQ information becomes available, then you will be able to also be starting to use some of those other reports within the new risk assessment tool to give you a visualization of what's going on there. So there is a year for transition, and by then, end of March 2021, we will have completed a fully new full transition to the new tools. And we will be removing various Maplecroft data at that point, and then at a minimum of 12 months, perhaps longer, we will be consulting with members. We will also be removing visibility of the old SAQ information. So I hope that's clear. I also just struck me, Jean-Pascal, you asked about the new SAQ. If you didn't join us for the webinar about the changes to our self-assessment questionnaire and what that will look like, then that webinar is available as a recording on our website that we have built for the SAQ and risk tool. I will be sending out a link to that website in the follow-up email to this webinar, which you will get in about a week. I hope that's clear. And that really is the end of our presentation. And does anyone have any further questions? We've got a few minutes available to us, and so if you do have any questions, we would be happy to answer. Thanks, Jean-Pascal. He said, very clear, thank you. Great. Yvonne, you have asked a really great question. How much information will go out to B members that they need to complete a new SAQ? We will be doing a lot of communications in the run up to the launch of the new SAQ, and then once it's launched, we will also be sending out emails to B members to encourage them to fill out the new SAQ. When they log into Sedex Advanced, they will also get a pop-up that tells them that they need to do this and encourages them when they log in to complete the SAQ. Also, A and A B members will be able to see a comparison completion report. At the moment, you can see an SAQ completion. You can see data on how much of your supplier's SAQs have been completed. You will be able to see that for the new SAQ as well. So we will also be supporting our A and AB members with comms that they can also send out to their suppliers. Joelle has asked, can we import information from our company, so in your case, our own product category coding? I think that's going to be a question for you, Tom.
Yeah, so I guess there's two things to that. One is if you keep the information up to date in Sedex Advance, then yeah, of course you'll be able to filter by that information. But I think you're referring to actually kind of uploading information and connecting it with specific suppliers within the portal. That's something that we'd really like to do, and we're just exploring, you know, how we make that happen. Basically, we believe that Sedex Analytics has the functionality to do that in a kind of advanced feature, and we're looking at that. It would be great. We have kind of designed the functionality to add your own custom filters, which you may have seen within the views there. So there'll be 3 additional filters where essentially the idea is that you could do exactly what you've suggested and import your own information, connect that to particular suppliers and then filter by it. We just have to kind of iron through the technology side of things at the moment to understand whether it's possible. So I think we'll have to provide you with a further update to confirm whether that is going to be implemented or not closer to the launch.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. It's 9 o'clock UK time. We have reached the end of our hour. I appreciate we didn't have that much time for questions. But if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to email them in to training@sedexglobal.com. As I said, we'll be sending out follow-up emails as well, but do send in any questions you have and we will be happy to answer them. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope you found that